Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, Joe Cucchiara, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, Joe Cucchiara.
Welcome in, Joe Cucchiara with Real Estate Radio Live. We're doing another show here on, for what else, the housing market and some new developments, what's going on. It's really an ever-changing motion and what's happening here. And here to talk about it is my good friend and partner here, Jack Russo from via Florida. I'm guessing even though you got the Golden Gate Bridge behind you, you're in Florida at the moment, right?
Right. I mean, I get back to California, so I left the backgrounder the way it is. I'm trying to find the right backgrounder for East Coast versus West Coast. And, I haven't quite figured it out, but I'll get to it. I sometimes use the background of what I really have found to be a very enjoyable experience, which is to be doing yoga at least once a day.
There you go.
Of course, I don't like this picture. It's like 50 pounds ago. I'm like a fat pig on the floor, and I kind of feel embarrassed. But the good news is the yoga, biking, weightlifting regime has really enabled a 50-pound loss. And I have to say, I think it's probably going to enable me to extend my life in ways that money, which I sometimes put up that background of money, because I think health is very much tied to wealth. Yeah. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. I think there's that Benjamin Franklin quote that's so accurate. But yeah, it's interesting. I haven't quite figured out what the right backgrounder is.
Well, I will have to agree. And I guess before we jump into the housing market updates, what I take out of that is you probably attribute, I'm guessing, I don't want to put words in your mouth, you would attribute maybe the lifestyle change, if you will, and the move to Florida from California. I talk just a couple of minutes, because you've spent 40 plus years in the Silicon Valley and I'm still here. There is an element, I don't know what it is. Don't you think there's an element when you're here, you feel like you're a little more rushed and have to do more? Or is that just me? What do you think?
I think that there's a mentality in both. I grew up in New York, so I'll even compare and contrast that. I'm a member of the New York Bar, which I've been for same 40 years as California. I took the New York exam right after the California exam. I didn't even study for it, but I passed it. God bless. And I passed the Florida exam. I did study for that. My wife said, "You're going to fail. You're not studying enough." But I passed that too without taking review courses on any of them. But the short answer is, I felt when I left New York that New York was all about hustle and money, and Silicon Valley was laid back. And that was back in the 70s. And I thought, California is all about surfing and relaxing and dreaming, and Silicon Valley became very much like New York. It became hustle, make money, accumulate, and, just become a, millionaire. Used to be New York. Right. California became billionaire. Now people are saying really it's a trillionaire that some people are after, which is unfathomable, because you can't possibly spend that money. You'd have to give it away. So then, Florida, which brought me here for a variety of family reasons associated with my parents and my brother. You heard that whole story. Yeah. But the short answer is, I think that they are much more tuned into a more holistic life, which means there really is just a 5-day work week. People do honor their weekends. People don't expect to respond to emails after, whatever, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night. There's a different mentality. And particularly if you get to some of the wealthier places in Florida, like there's a bunch of small towns on the east coast of Florida that you never even heard of, like Jupiter Isle, Ponte Vedra. There's lots of little towns. Very wealthy people there. And very wealthy is not Silicon Valley wealth. I mean, if you're like a deca millionaire, 10 million or more, I think that's considered pretty wealthy. I was looking at something, I have to say, I was looking at something you'll get a kick at. when I was a kid in the 1950s,
Uh-huh.
my parents would babysit us, my mom, because my dad didn't do any real co-parenting. He had us work with this TV program called The Millionaire. I don't know if you remember it, Joe. You
Oh,
might
I don't remember
it.
I don't
It was
know.
this guy that would give away $1 million.
No, I don't remember that. No.
This guy would give away $1 million. This ran for about 5 years, from the mid 1950s to the early 1960s, in which the storyline was this guy who was probably a billionaire would give away $1 million and change the life of some individual.
Wow.
And each show would, of course, as kids, we're getting indoctrinated. We don't realize it until you got to become a millionaire. And no one's going to give you $1 million. This is like table land.
That's
but
great.
It is going to change your life. And some of them were changes for the good. Most of them were changes for the bad.
Yeah.
Like people really got into a lot of trouble.
Right.
They made a lot of mistakes. So here I would say if you're worth 10 million or more, you're like considered the upper 1%. In Silicon Valley, I think maybe you're the upper 10%, right? At some level.
No, that's a really good point. So I would say that.
But wait, Joe, let me make the footnote because I want to tie the millionaire.
Okay.
Today's dollars, 60 years later, that 1 million is 10.1 million.
Is that right?
It's not exactly. So it's sort of like the next show would be Who Wants to Be a Deca Millionaire, at least.
Wow.
So think about that.
That's amazing. And since we're on this, and it does tie into the housing market, Jack, you know, what's interesting is you just talked a little bit about the Florida lifestyle, but wouldn't you say, and maybe it's changing now in the Silicon Valley, but do you remember several years ago it was glorified to be a startup CEO that was getting on his bike at 4 a.m, coming back, not sleeping, working for 15. That was glorified, wasn't it?
That was glorified. The lack of sleep was glorified. The research is all demonstrated. It's crazy because it doesn't really make you effective. It ruins your decision making. A lot of people think many of Trump's tweets were done because he wasn't getting sleep. Many people think that Elon Musk has the same problem. He's getting 3-4 hours sleep and he's tweeting with half a brain working. Yeah. So there's a lot of research that says sleep is 8 hours of sleep, maybe more, is really required if you're going to be performing optimally. Yeah. A lot of Silicon Valley goes off on the opposite direction, although I've heard recently that people are really starting to understand that sleep is a necessity, and even in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I would think so. And as we talk about the housing, Silicon Valley and a lot of the high tech, I would also have to say that some of the luster has worn off, where that used to be kind of the shining star and darling and diamond. Some of that I'm seeing and feeling, sensing that the luster of even the employees, where you go in 12, 15 hours a day and you have lunch served to you and they have the barbershop there and the massage. I'm not sure that that's the trend. I think they're trending away from that too now.
It's come at a big cost because the layoffs are like a shocking, screeching train crashing into the station. And, if you think about it, had they said to people, look, we're not going to do all these wacky things that make it luxurious, but we're going to help you set up a Roth IRA. We're going to help you with a down payment on your house. Exactly. We're going to help you get an electric bike, and all sorts of things actually would improve the quality of life in a real way, in a lasting way. They didn't do that. They did more of the creature comforts at the office. And in many ways, the pandemic kind of proved the office became somewhat superfluous. Right. And then with that, arguably, is the layoffs, because people became superfluous. At least a certain body of people or a certain number of people became superfluous. So it's a strange world. And it reminds me of decades ago when there were all these windfalls because oil was discovered in the North Sea. Mm-hmm. And, places like the UK squandered billions of dollars of oil tax windfall oil tax revenues. Mm-hmm. But places like Norway, they invested that money, and they've got a trillionaire sovereign wealth fund there in Norway that they made off of the windfall taxes on oil that was discovered in the North Sea. It's a classic example of the hedgehog versus hare approach to savings, which is very much about real estate in some way.
It is. It is, and we've seen this tremendous growth in real estate and appreciation. And several years ago, everybody thought it would never come down, and now we are seeing, which I have to say, if you go back and listen to some of my comments and podcasts and stuff, I've been covering this so long. I did feel like a couple of years ago, the first markets to be affected after a while would be secondary markets, vacation homes, places where people were buying homes because rates were so cheap and they had so much money and startup money, and places like Idaho and Montana and in Arizona, some places of Florida, but not so much because of the job market. But some of these markets that were very, very popular to visit and vacation, but did not have a strong job market to support them.
Right. So, and that's changed. That's changed to some degree, right?
Right.
I mean, to me, that's changed. And people are recognizing that they could work from wherever, right? I mean, that's part of the issue. Can you just work from wherever? And a lot of people are doing that. A lot of people are working from wherever. And their view of life is we get to work from wherever.
Right.
And maybe that is going to be the way this works, that you get to work from wherever.
Yeah, ironically, that's still the truth. And I'm not sure that's going to change. It'll change some, but the point that has the housing market affected by is that now the markets that are slowing and the appreciation that's coming down and the rescinding of markets are in places like Montana, Idaho. I have a friend that, matter of fact, I know there's segments of Florida. Everything's so segmented now. Are you familiar with the, what's that area in Florida on the coastal, might be the western, I'll think about it before we talk about it. He's a real estate, he buys a lot of real estate, flips some, keeps some. He's seen for the first time in several years, homes sitting on the market in this little area that he focuses on, 2-3 months, which you'd never see more than a couple of days before. And we're seeing some of that in Montana, and we're seeing some of the Idaho, some segments of Nevada, although there's some pretty good strong job markets. So I think the element here, rates are certainly up. That takes these first-time home buyers, really puts them in a predicament, a tough spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a lot of people just worried and concerned about the economy. I don't know if most of you, as you're listening to this podcast, you'll probably see, if you haven't already, that we had another inflation number that concerned the market today. And I think the optimism was the market talking about we turned the corner. And I would say, I've been saying this for a while, we have not turned the corner. I think things are going to get worse before they get better. So how that affects housing, this is the reason why I think housing still has a way to go. I'm still a big fan of real estate. I always will be. I think that I don't really care when you buy it, as long as you hold it long term, you're going to be in good shape. But I would be concerned about what I'm going to see now is people that are losing their job. They have to cut costs. What the big assets that start to be moved are second homes and other properties that they're not primary residents. So we'll see how the rest of the year folds out. How do you see the inflation numbers and potential recession and the housing market kind of from your view?
Well, I think the housing market has certainly cooled, and the best way to show that cooling is what you're saying, which is look at the secondary housing, the vacation housing, because those are second homes, typically Airbnb or partly rented during the summer. And those people, they basically see that as a luxury. And so Stinson Beach, which is north of Silicon Valley over the Golden Gate Bridge, it's probably gone down 20 to 25%. Now, you can get exact data on Zillow. You can look at the trends, but I forget what the zip code is out there, but type in Stinson Beach, California, and you'll see the numbers. And so what happens is, people don't buy. Sometimes B, people don't sell either because they hate taking a loss. Hey, my house was worth on the beach $4 million. It was a vacation house. Or if they have a big loan against it and it's a variable interest rate loan, then as the rates go up, they feel they're under pressure and they sell. So you see prices change. That's one way to measure. Another way to measure is to look at what is happening in what might be called the high end of housing, because that's usually where it starts to really go down. Because the loans are bigger, the real estate taxes are bigger, the interest rates have. So places like Atherton, which is a very wealthy neighborhood in Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, Woodside, Portola Valley, I bet those have taken a 20 to maybe even 25% hit. Obviously, you can look at the data on Zillow and elsewhere. And I think the place that doesn't take as much of a hit, but you know it better than I, is what I would call the $1 million or less condo.
That's
where there are just too many people that want an alternative to renting. And they're going to take a variable rate loan, which is still going to be a teaser rate, maybe at some level. And maybe it's only 5 years, maybe it's 3 years, but they may move and upgrade within that period anyway. And you know all the numbers on that, but I would think those might be only a 5 to 10 to 15% hit. Now, the boogie in my mind is we've had some wacko weather in California dealing with storms that created flooding. So places that didn't flood before that have to now be viewed as flood risk places, like Menlo Park got flooded. I have friends in Menlo Park that said, I can't believe, I don't have flood insurance, and I've got a couple $100,000 worth of damage from the storm that happened a couple of months ago, maybe even less than that. It said, I don't know what to do about it. I don't have that money stored away somewhere. I got to take out a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, which is exactly your business. And I got to take a loan to fix my garage and to fix everything that got ruined in that flood. So, there's a lot of stuff to now have to deal with and think about. And so I would say we're probably going to see it worsen before it gets better because of all the layoffs that are playing out. And some people think there's a bigger, larger, more massive trend going on where people are going to gravitate to just lower cost locations outside California, like Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Montana. I mean, there's a lot of states that have a lot of land that's still not populated. And it's not that they're bad places to live. They may have weather issues that aren't as much sunshine, but they have universities, they have infrastructure. I mean, search top 10 places to move from California. I bet you'll see it's not, or from Silicon Valley. It's not going to be California, right?
No, it's not. The market, it is interesting. The segment that I see is pretty strong right now, again, because I speak with and work with a lot of real estate investors. And it may sound kind of funny for the people that live in California or Florida to a certain extent, but the market that's really thriving right now is people that are buying investment properties for, say, 60 to 80 to 100,000. I know that might sound funny, but there's a lot of people swooping up still those homes. And because the belief is no matter where you are, everybody still needs a place to live. And you could argue in a market that becomes a tougher job market where you have layoffs and a retraction for salaries, you're going to get more and more people opting to rent, which would, theoretically drive up the rent market. So I'm seeing a lot of activity. It's interesting. So where we're seeing some multiple offers in some places, which again, it sounds funny to those that are listening to the podcast, maybe in California, but you could buy homes in Illinois and Detroit, and I could name 50 or 60 different little cities for less than $100,000 that would rent for $700 or $800 a month.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a list. I just said top 10 places to move if you want to leave Silicon Valley because of the cost of living. Just simple Google search. Number 1, Huntsville, Alabama, $266,000 of median home price. Dallas, Texas, $350 median home price.
That's still low.
Baltimore, Maryland, $325 median. These are all median. Chicago, Illinois, $309, great big city, albeit weather issues. Atlanta, Georgia, $336. This is the midpoint. Austin, Texas, which has had quite a run, surprising. It's saying median home price there is still $369. I thought
hard
it would
to believe. Yeah.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, $275. Raleigh, North Carolina, $349. Detroit, Michigan, $252. And then the last one of the 10 is Minneapolis, Minnesota, $372.
Huh.
So, they're all under 500,000. They all would probably qualify for loans that are at 80% of real loan to value, right?
Right. Yeah.
But those numbers, because those are, what do you call them? Conforming.
Yeah. Conforming loans.
And those are, teaser rates still apply to variable interest rates, right? What are those rates like, Joe?
Well, you could still, with the teaser rates, you could still get something which sounds a little high now what we came out of, but in the mid to the high 5%.
Right.
And honestly, when you're looking at $100,000 or $200,000 loan, believe it or not, it's not a major difference between 3.5 and 5.5.
No, it's a few $100s a month. And for most people, they're like the convenience of, I've heard renters say this, the convenience of having my own garage, the convenience of having my own washer dryer, the convenience of being able to have privacy. There's like huge number of issues compared to being an apartment dweller. Right.
Yeah.
And you're building a savings account.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this should be taught in high school, but that concept of your home might be your biggest savings account should be drilled into most Americans, because it's the last tax shelter on earth, which is 500,000 as a married couple can be tax-free after 2 years of occupancy of a home. That equity can come out federal tax-free up to 500,000 for a married couple who own a home. So, if you own a home and you accumulate wealth in it, it's tax-free. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge advantage that most people don't even realize when they buy their first home.
Right.
And you can roll that, of course, into a new home. You could decide to take it out if you want. There's all sorts of combinations you can do. Some people wisely do them with 1031 as well. That requires a lot more planning, but it's doable. You can combine both Section 121 as well as 1031. I know it's not a tax show, but there are incentives, including obviously the mortgage deduction of this cap, right?
Yeah.
What is the cap? What is the cap now?
Two things. Well, in California, I think this is countrywide too. The maximum loan amount, which is allowed to deduct 100% of your mortgage interest, is up to $750,000, and then your maximum property tax deduction, which again, if you're in high valuation states, it's going to be an issue, but not so much. But so you could write up to $10,000 a year in property tax on your primary residence. So
yeah, to me, that's like the incentives that probably are not going away, although they talk about changing the numbers, because it used to be an unlimited tax deduction on the mortgage, I think, if I remember. Or maybe
it was up to 1.1 million. They had it on the high, and there's some talk that they're going to try to bring New York, California, and a couple other places back to that, but I'm not sure if that'll happen or not.
Yeah, to me, Americans, the federal government, state governments have wanted people to be homeowners. There's certain stability in that. At the same time, your kids and maybe eventually your grandkids, they want freedom ahead of stability. They don't want to own a car or a home or anything. They want the freedom to say 30-day notice and I'm heading to Bali or Australia. They want to live an experiential life. And so that's changing the market to some degree. And I don't know where that all goes in the long run, but I can tell you a lot of individuals I see in their 20s and 30s, they don't want to be tied down to an area. They start to see the advantage from a school district point of view when they start having kids. Because then they say, I want the best school district. That's going to be at least eight years, maybe 12, maybe longer. And then they buy based on the school district more than anything else. If the public schools are good, or maybe if there's a private school that they want to be near.
Yeah, I would say that as we get close to wrapping up, the other thing I want to touch on quickly is new homes, new construction, new build. So builders are really taking a beating. And this is cyclical. This comes around. This is very market adjusts. So what's happening with builders, just a real quick education of those that might not be familiar. So, they tie up costs so long in advance. They look at purchasing land and then the cost to build, develop, and build. And so oftentimes, they have to they're subject to market conditions, of course. So they'll either accelerate or slow down builds depending on how they see markets developing. So right now, because the interest rates have shot up so fast, so high, so fast, builders are one of the segments that are hurting the most. And I think so they're in a dilemma. They have to be careful about dropping their prices because so what they'll typically do, I would say, if anybody's out in the marketplace for a new home, it's a great time actually to go in and negotiate with a new home builder, because you may not get a lower price, but I'll tell you, you could get upgrades, you could get credits, you could get $50,000 to buy down your interest rate. The builder will almost do anything to get you in that home before they lower the price. So I would say that it actually presents itself an opportunity for anybody listening to this that may be looking at new homes in and around really anywhere in the United States, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, there are good times to buy, there are bad times to buy. Most people don't necessarily perfectly time it, because
right.
You have to have a great sense of the interest rates are low,
right?
But usually the prices are high and you don't realize it. And then as the interest rates change, prices change. And look, if you could lock in a rate and hold that rate during a period when real estate is dropping, so you can lower your price and get a great deal. Occasionally people are able to time it that way. For most people, the timing is based on, hey, I moved for a job,
right?
Don't want to go to an apartment. I had a real estate broker. They found the place that's within walking, biking, whatever distance, commute distance. I liked it. I bought it. I mean, that's kind of their thinking. They want to get settled. Some people are much more deliberate about it. They sort of spend the time, they live out of an Airbnb. Sometimes they rent for a while.
Yeah.
In general, I mean, the interesting aspect of this is, the numbers, but most people stay for about, 5-7 years, roughly.
That's about it. Yeah. 7 years. Yeah.
They don't stay like my parents. They burned their 30-year mortgage in Brooklyn, New York, and said, hallelujah, we're free, right?
Right.
Free at last. But then they realized, too cold in New York, we want to move to Florida. I mean, so they burned their mortgage and they never refinanced that house. And I think they had like a 3% 30-year loan for a long, forever.
Well, yeah. And before we wrap things up, the other thing I want to touch on, I'd love to get your opinion on it too. And I don't have any data and statistics, but we could probably do that for the next show. But one of the things that I'm seeing in my business, and I do think it kind of plays along with your accurate assessment of the 20s and the 30-year-olds, is I don't think anybody would come out and say this in that age group, but realize this is our children's generation is the first generation that will likely not do better than us. So if that makes sense, most people listening to this, right? So Jack, your parents did better than your grandparents, you've done better than your parents. So where it has all of a sudden shifted, and I see this, you see this, it's sad, but the likelihood of our children doing better than us is not that good, right?
A lot of people say that the 2008 vintage, or the 2008 depression, recession, Great Recession, I guess is what it's referred to, really changed that next generation.
Right.
It really made people wonder, is it worth all of the accumulation, all of the effort, all of this relentless pursuit of more? It's now becoming more the disciplined pursuit of less.
Right.
It's almost like I want to get rid of things and have more freedom to experience things, because they think it's all temporary anyway. And they think, what's the point? So you have to wonder, is that philosophy going to produce more creative thinking?
I don't know.
Because we do get burdened by sawing a lot of wood without really seeing the forest for the trees.
Right.
Once you're sawing wood, you think, I just have to saw wood. And you can almost argue a lot of heart attacks and a lot of strokes are generated by people that believe I just need to create more sawdust and saw more wood. when the reality is they should be exploring new forests for new ideas and new opportunities.
Right.
But, Joe, I do think we're seeing something. I look at three things. I think these three things I look at. I look at what's happening in the secondary real estate market, what's dropping, the vacation market. That's one big tell. I look at something a lot of people don't look at, which is I look at whether leases on expensive automobiles are being returned.
Yeah, you've mentioned that before. Interesting.
And that's a big tell, because that means people are saying, look, this is too expensive. I don't need the car. It's a luxury. I can't pay the $750 per month. I don't want to pay the $750 per month. And then the third thing is you could start looking at, and this really requires a subscription to a data service, what are called notices of default on loans, NODs in California, because they're trust deeds.
Right.
And you can get a service. The data is not really yet online. You have to pay for a service to go to the courthouse, look at what's posted. And that represents, I've now not paid my first or second trust deed. Typically, the second would not be paid and the first would be paid, but sometimes neither are paid. And that represents people are just plumb not going to pay their mortgage anymore. And maybe they're going to walk away and give the keys back to the bank, which is a lot of what played out in the 2008 timeframe.
It did.
And so if you watch those three data points, they signal whether some tsunami is about to occur.
Interesting.
That tsunami represents an opportunity for those that have cash stashed away, swoop up, and they did, even in Stinson Beach, which is otherwise a luxury community. They got places on the beach that were previously worth millions for several $100,000.
Wow.
Because people walked away from loans and banks just said, hey, bid at an auction and we'll take whatever is the highest cash bid.
Wow, amazing.
There's interesting stuff that happens. You can either view it as a tragedy or an opportunity.
Right.
Some people are opportunistic. Some people go through the tragedy. Some people think the stock market is not a good indicator. It's so futuristic. Look at how bullish the stock market has been. Maybe not lately, but generally speaking, the long-term trend has been up, and more up. And some people just can't believe that that's going to continue forever. It seems to be somewhat inflated. So look at companies that are doing so well, supposedly, and is there real profits there that justify the valuations?
Yeah. Well, before we wrap it up and we get Jack, remind everybody where he is, what he does, and his offering legal services. I will say the last thing that we have not talked about, and I'll throw it out there as a teaser, and we could address it maybe in a week or so, Jack, is I'll tell you what could change everything and anything that we just talked about today, and it's looming, and that is a potential war. And I know I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm not saying it because I wouldn't wish harm on anyone, but I am concerned about the political environment right now, what's happening with China and possibly Taiwan, what's going on with the relationship with potentially Putin and Xi and other things that may be developing. I'm not so sure that we could have something brewing in the behind the scenes that none of us have any control over.
I 100% agree with you. And I have so many friends that think I'm, tragically non-optimistic about Putin and about what's going on in Moldova. And I've said to people, look, years ago, let me just say this, and I don't want to get political, but years ago, people would say, if a guy like Elon Musk, who's going to probably be our first trillionaire that makes it to Mars, because there'll be other trillionaires, but they won't make it to Mars. He said, why can't we think of a peace plan around? And then he listed 3 to 5 things that included sort of Ukraine giving up some land to Russia that has mostly Russian people in it on the eastern side. And people condemned him and said, you should not be tweeting that. You should not be talking that. You should not be trying to influence or instigate a settlement. And I thought, he's got a First Amendment right. If he thinks a settlement should be constructed around A, B, and C, God bless him. Blessed are the peacemakers, man. He's going to be a trillionaire. He's obviously was at the time, maybe still is, the richest guy on earth. he's allowed to issue his suggestion, and maybe that'll start something of a discussion between Putin and Zelensky.
Yeah.
And then China yesterday or the day before issued a 12-point plan or a 10-point plan. I was reading it this morning. I was like, this is not trash. This is like, how can you get to peace? It starts with sovereignty. Okay, that's a good first point. Then 9 or 10 or 11 other points. And the U.S. completely condemned China, saying you should have stopped after point 1. Well, Putin's not just going to agree to point 1.
No.
China's trying to be a mediator. Why are we being so insufferable about the suggestions, both by Musk and by China? Now, maybe you could comment, criticize, but don't just say this is rubbish. At least they're taking a step forward to instigate a conversation. No one else is doing that. It's not like Biden is saying, look, I want to be a peacemaker. I really don't like supplying billions of dollars, billions, maybe soon trillions of dollars to destructive behavior. That's coming out of our tax money. Maybe going to come out of the eventual Social Security pot. I mean, if you're in your 60s, you start worrying about that. You start saying to yourself, should I get on Social Security now so that if you're enrolled, you've got kind of a detrimental reliance argument, even if you really would like to continue to work for a period of time? So I don't want to be unpatriotic, but I have to say the discussion about resolution has been squashed left, right, and sideways in ways that I just don't understand. It seems like somebody should be, and maybe it's got to be Switzerland or someone that's viewed that's totally neutral. I don't know what Switzerland is, that says, look, there's these 6 interests on one side and these 6 interests on another. And people, of course, think that, China is setting something up for Taiwan and the eventual takeover of Taiwan. I'll make this point. I think eventually China will end up controlling Taiwan, not unlike the way it controls Hong Kong. And it is going to happen, maybe even in our lifetimes. Hopefully it doesn't happen by force. Hopefully it happens by some agreement or treaty. But it seems inevitable to me that just like maybe the U.S. will eventually take over Cuba.
I get concerned, but we'll see. There's not much we could do but discuss it and be educated about it. And I would agree with you too. I mean, I don't know, and I don't want to get political either, but I am such a big fan and a believer of freedom of speech and people's opinion. I just, to me, this is so simple. It really is. If, everybody has a right to voice their opinion, it doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Doesn't even, quite frankly, you don't even need to listen to it. But that is one of the wonderful things about our free country. I mean, I really, that to me is so crystal clear, where some of the other stuff may be a little foggy, but I never could figure that out. I really couldn't. Why someone can't voice their opinion no matter what it is.
And not have what I would call the destructive criticism. As opposed to more constructive, have you considered what the precedent is, that sort of thing. Look, Putin is going to carry out this war if the alternative is he's got to face war criminal charges. So he goes down the way Hitler went down, which is fighting to the end. So if that's what people want, then we have to anticipate at least a tactical nuclear strike somewhere. And that's going to be a major change of proportions that are unheard of since Nagasaki. And the way the Japanese would talk about that is the way we'd have to start thinking about the risk, because the Japanese never really, in my opinion, Japanese never really recovered from the nuclear bombs that the U.S. dropped in Japan. And they're still not recovered, in my opinion. Maybe they will eventually, but that was a major, major life quake for those citizens in Japan. Some of them, I think, are still alive.
I would agree. I would agree. Well, as usual, a great, lively conversation. Before we duck out of here, Jack, remind everybody where they could reach you. They need
so we're really a national firm. We have practices and lawyers in California, New York, Florida. We're admitted in 7 or more states, and we're admitted federally throughout the United States in most jurisdictions. And we can easily co-counsel and local counsel in various federal cases throughout, as we've done in Texas and elsewhere. And so the best way to reach is typically by email, which is jrusso, JRUSSO @computerlaw.com, computerlaw.com. Obviously, we still pick up the phone at 650-327-9800. And in general, I'd say that if you have a major problem, we get a lot of inquiries for what I call very minor problems.
Yes.
Usually give a little bit of pro bono advice to people about them, but it's not really what we want to do. We choose our clients as opposed to our clients choosing us. And, pretty much it's a mutual choice, but it's based upon selectivity by both parties. And so we like to help. And certainly I do a lot of pro bono work. I'm going to be out in California next month giving a presentation at Stanford Medical School. I'll invite you to it, Joe.
That'd be great.
It's a management class. A free lunch is given there. It's open to the public. I'm pretty sure. I'll double check. Well, make sure you get a guest invitation.
Okay.
It really tries to aid medical students in thinking about what does their next 40 plus years, which might become 50 or 60 plus years if our lifespans are getting to 100. Hopefully our health spans are getting there too. Our work spans are probably going to go out to 50 or 60 years.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? It's a different world in that sense.
Right.
And what should they get ready for and be thinking about?
Yeah.
And that's really the topic for that conversation. I want to say it's on March 15. I'll get you an invitation, Joe.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I'll post it on the next podcast too.
Right.
So always good catching up. Thanks for all your advice, Jack. And
you're welcome.
Stay safe and healthy out there in Florida.
You too.
All right.
Talk to you later.
Take care, Jack. 𝗘𝘀𝗁𝗘 Real Estate Radio Live. Again, a thank you to Jack Russo for joining us. Always great wisdom and information and background data. He's a great source and resource for anything economic and legal services as well. So more information, you can always reach me at joe@𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗙live.com. That is joe@𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗙live.com or 408-838-9060. That's 408-838-9060. Thanks again for tuning in and take care.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit 𝗟𝗡𝗡𝗙live.com. That's 𝗟𝗡RadioLive.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at 𝗟𝗡RadioLive.com.